So thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to give you just a quick intro, but Josh doesn't really need an intro, so you're getting my kind of short version of an intro. For those of you who need a little context, Josh was one of the founders of Omniture. He took that company public. He sold it to Adobe. It is the reason that Adobe has such a great footprint here in the state of Utah. And then he started and he's running a company called Domo, which is one of the unicorns in the country. We can have a different unicorn conversation later. But Josh has done a really great job. And when we were thinking about creating this event, we were talking about, okay, who could we have help us kick off the conversation that could really, drive and elevate the right kind of conversation. And Josh has actually been one of the advocates of the Women Tech Council from the very beginning when we started 8 years ago. And whenever we've needed help or support or something, I've been able to pick up the phone and call Josh and ask for his help with the organization. And he was one of those executives that recognized that women in teams help drive performance from the very early days, from the days when he formed his executive teams at Omniture. And even as he's continued into Domo, he also has one of the teams with a lot of more women than most companies have on his senior staff. Actually, because we really like Josh, a number of years ago when we at the Women Tech Awards were coming up with a program where we wanted to be able to recognize people who had made a significant impact for women in technology. And Josh was actually our first recipient. And it wasn't, because, we created that Impact Award because we felt the need to be able to recognize all of our male counterparts that are doing such amazing things for women in technology. And because of that, we thought that Josh was the perfect person to kind of help kick off this conversation. Some of the things we've learned at the Women Tech Council is that if we don't have the conversation, nothing changes. In our CEO roundtable this morning, there was a specific conversation, actually even related to some of the execs sharing things that by simply making the effort to have the conversation over the last year, it had increased the number of women they'd hired by 10%. And it all came just because it was now a conscientious conversation that the organization was having. And I think those are the things that we're now seeing impact. So Josh, you have always been driven by performance, right? I always describe you as fearless. You are completely fearless, but you're also very performance driven. And I'm really interested as to, you embraced having really diverse teams from the very beginning. And I believe that you genuinely did that because performance drives you. What types of things, what are the results that you see by having diverse teams, and what continues to motivate you to make sure that's such a core part of your teams?
I guess I never sat down and thought diversity is going to drive performance. And that might be controversial, but I've just never thought that. And I wouldn't say that because we have women executives, we perform differently than if we had men executives, that we perform differently if we had all women executives. I just don't think about it that way. But what I always did think is we have a bunch of women that work for us, and how do the women that work for us that aren't executives feel like there is value when they can't look and see leaders that are held up as, here's some people that are really successful that we really value, and they're no different than you, so you've got something to feel like you don't have that ceiling, you don't have that glass ceiling. And I think for really at the very beginning, I think one of the most interesting things, and you mentioned this to me when we were talking, is I've thought a lot about why don't people hire more women executives, and I constantly am watching myself. I watch the way I use my iPhone. I watch the way I buy technology. I watch the way I approve purchase orders so I can understand how I can improve our own business. And I watch the way that I hire. And when people ask me, "Do you know anybody that does this?" I think about my friends, and I think about the guys I hang out with, and the guys I hung out with in college, and the guys I hang out with now, and I think about their friends. I don't think about who are the women that I know, and it's a different relationship. And I was thinking, it's different. Some of this stuff's innate. You don't tell kindergartners to go play with little boys that are little boys. They just do. And little girls to play with little girls. They just do. So it happens early on, and so I think we've got to combat that in some way. And the easiest thing to do is, and I got the idea really at first. So I wanted to get some women. So at first I was just looking for women, and Kathy Donahoe was the first female executive that I ever had. And then I did notice some things. I'm like, oh, there's some things that she's better at that I'm sure there's some men out there that are good at that, but it's hard for me to envision men that would be good at that the way she is. And there is some nurturing that she does for some people that I wouldn't nurture, and they love it, and the feedback I get is they love it. And then I remember with Kathy, I always ask my customers that I would meet, I'm like, why did you choose Omniture? And one of the three things that I kept on hearing was, and everyone there is really nice and really happy to be there. And every time I'd meet a new employee, like, why did you choose to come to Omniture? And inevitably, one of the top three things, and then I met with Kathy. And I'm like, okay, noted. So I could see the value of having diversity, I guess. But the other thing that I noted is, you look at the NFL, and it was pretty dang crazy that you have that many black players and like one black coach, back in the day. And like when the first black coach goes to the Super Bowl, everyone's so excited. And it's, I think, more about just helping everyone believe, helping all those black players believe that they can become head coach because they see a bunch of head coaches. And it's still a mess relative to the number of players, and it's going to trail. But at the same time, when that thing really shifted is when they said, all right, you are not allowed to hire a coach in the NFL if you don't interview at least one black player. One black coach. If you don't interview a black head coach, you can't hire anybody. Now, being a white male, I don't want people to go and hire people that are less qualified, but they're diverse. That really pisses me off. But that said, you don't need to do that. But you do need to make an effort to find the people that maybe you're not friends with. And so that's what I've done probably 5 times over the years for a position where we've called a headhunter. And it's really funny, the response that I get. But I've told them, I don't want to see any male candidates. I only want to see female candidates for this role. That's it. And then inevitably they'll show us like 5 or 6, and that's only 5 or 6 women that they know. And then they really want to show us, but you got to meet this guy over here. He's great. He's right, And I'm like, no, actually, no. I told you at the beginning, I want to meet females only. And, and the cool thing is once you kind of get it started, then when we're looking for somebody, then Heather says, oh, I've got some friends. Then Kathy says, oh, I've got some friends. Then Catherine Wong, oh, I've got some friends. And then as we get women in, like Catherine's been hiring, I didn't even know there were other female executives in engineering in the state. And she keeps finding them. I don't know them. They're not friends with me. I don't hang out with them. But she's finding them. So I think, it's just some basic stuff that needs to be done. And when you do those basic things, it has a dramatic impact.
Absolutely. So you're talking about one of the things that we completely agree with, too, which is this conversation of who's in our networks. Because the majority of jobs go to people we know, right? And so because like being a woman in tech, my network is actually mostly men, but most men's networks are mostly men.
Yeah.
And so we think this is a really important conversation. How do we help change that? Like as an overall, community where this is a very real issue, right? Like to your point, like Catherine knows all these great women, technologists, right? That she can hire because she knows them. How do we create more exposure for those women as they're coming up in their careers to other men? Because the majority of women are getting hired by men. So like, how do we start to change that conversation and address this problem of networks, of mixed networks?
I was at a conference over this last weekend. I first actually want to say something. I'm really pissed off at Brad Rencher, actually. I know he's fearful for me to come here and what I might say. And when he got up and said Catherine Wong is one of the best engineering executives in the state, I thought that was a real disservice that you did to Catherine. Brad, where are you? Everyone knows she's the best executive in technology in the state in engineering. No offense to anyone else in here in engineering. But, one thing I told Catherine, kind of all jokes aside, is I don't like getting up and ever saying, I don't like going to awards that Catherine gets where she's one of the best women in tech. And I kind of joke with her, but when I see her, I'm like, Catherine, this is complete BS. I hate this freaking award. And she kind of starts laughing, but she knows what I'm going to say. You're the best executive, not the best female executive. At the same time, it is good to recognize people. It is good to hold them up because, to your point, how do we fix these things? I was at this conference over the weekend, and there was a panel of board members, and it was really cool because there were 5 board members up there that were all really successful on a lot of different boards. 3 of them were women, 2 of them were men. Like, okay. And for 45 minutes they talked, and no one talked about women versus men. And so finally I'm like, all right, we're running out of time, I gotta ask a question. And, I asked, and then these three women were like all over this. I'm like, what? How does Facebook go public? How do they even, how does that happen and not have any women on their board? It's shocking to me. And, it's shocking that no one's thinking about it. It's shocking that it happened. And I asked these women, I'm like, how do we get to more diversity on board? It just doesn't make any sense. And then one of the women said she's been placed on 3 boards by a recruiting firm, and that recruiting firm only places female executives. And so now you have a place to go to find female executives. So I was talking to her later, and I said, so tell me about your experience. She said, I'll tell you one thing that pisses me off. When some company calls me and says, we're looking for diversity, so we're really excited to talk to you. She's like, no, I'm not interested in talking to them. I write them off immediately. I don't care what company it is, because they're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's if you know that you want diversity, that's fine, but you still need to approach them with the same respect and same approach that you'd approach any other position. And but I think even for in our state, if there was, you've got a list, the V100 that comes out every year, and here's all the great entrepreneurs and executives, and it ends up being the same exact people every year on the list. How cool it would be if here's the top 100 women in technology, and here's 500 others that are up and coming. And if that list was out there, and then everyone that is looking for diversity can go and start poaching those people and increasing the salaries for those people, and other people fall into those gaps, and those people get into more executive roles. But I wouldn't know where to start. I really wouldn't know where to start. If I was to go out and say, okay, we're going to go and get a VP of sales, and I want to go call or director of sales. Let's talk about something that's pretty, let's say, more reasonable, because I don't know a lot of VP of sales either, women in our state. But directors of sales, I'm sure there's a lot of them. I don't know who they are. If there was a list that I could go to or my recruiting team could go to, I'm sure that I know they would, because I'd make them.
So let me push you on this just a little bit. So we completely agree that it is about this, how do we build these networks and how do we create elevation? And we actually wish we didn't have to have the conversations because,
Sure.
As a female in tech, you actually don't think about yourself as a female in tech. You think about your performance and the fact that you're results driven and that's what determines what your next step is, right? I never intentionally think because I'm a woman, it should be different. Like it's never been in my DNA. But it is true that it is an actual issue and that we have found by just changing the conversation, there are material impacts to teams. But one of the challenges we are faced with is that not actually everyone recognizes that they don't have a network of women. So we get asked all the time this question, hey, how do I go find women on my team? But a lot of people, they never even thought about the fact that their teams didn't include women or that they should. And we're finding that the barrier we're trying to break down is, how do we take all of the people that look like you, all of those senior executives who are defining cultures of their companies and who need the aha moment that says, I actually don't know where to go, what should I do? That becomes like the first step in solving the problem. Like, how do we help all of those senior executives that are really leading out on culture of hiring? How do we change the conversation for them? Because the women, and I would even say people underneath them somewhat know of the issue, but culture, top-down approach, that's what drives the solving of this problem.
Sure. I definitely agree with you. I'd say, if I'm in your shoes, the first thing I do is I'd rank everybody. That'll change it. Get all the executives, get the top 100 tech companies in the state and rank them. Get every company in the state, rank them. What percentage of women they have. Come up with a couple of quality things to rank them as well. Put the list out there. That's what I'd do. Because I promise it'll change. It'll change overnight. Everybody in the bottom 50% of that is going to change overnight. Or at least, the halfway intelligent ones will. And I'll tell you a story. There's an executive here in the state that I'm really good friends with, CEO, and he runs a great company. And it's really easy in Utah to be like, there's a lot of women that just they don't work as much as they do in other states, and that's fine. You know what? And a lot of the guys in the state have women that are staying at home and they like it and they think it's cool. So it's not like they think it's a problem. And I don't think it's a problem. The most important thing is they can do whatever they want. That's the most important thing. Men, women, whatever. And one thing that, the flip side of the thing that kind of upsets me sometimes is when women do make the choice to stay home and then they're looked down upon by either other women or other men or people in the Bay Area. And it's like, I thought the point was that everyone can do what they want, But I think there's a guy and he runs a great company and he lost a really big deal because the person he was interacting with on the other side was a female executive, and she went and she was getting ready to buy his product, a big purchase, and she went and looked at his executive team and said, "You have exactly 0 women. I'm not working with you." I thought that was pretty cool. Guess what? He has a lot of female executives now. He does. I mean, literally, he changed it in about 6 months because he knew he needed to fix it already. He knew it was a problem, but he hadn't been forced to get creative and figure out how to do it. So, and then the cool thing is, just the stuff that you're doing, the stories that you hear about, stories like that you hear about, stories like about Kathy Donahoe that you hear about and how successful she's been in helping my whole organization change. I hear from women all the time that come in and interview that they feel really comfortable. They didn't think they were going to be comfortable, and they come in and feel comfortable. And you said we have a lot of women in our executive team. We do relative to other tech companies and relative to other Utah companies, and it's 25%. So, and that's actually, it's not working hard at it. It's just forcing a couple positions to make sure that they're women, and then we're kind of letting it roll naturally from there. But you have to do a couple of things that are unnatural at the beginning. But again, it's not taking anyone less qualified. It's just making sure that, the people that are qualified, that you find them.
So in our CEO roundtable this morning, one of the points that was made by a gentleman at Goldman Sachs that especially because everyone has diversity initiatives, but they were talking about the fact that they had learned that you basically have 2 minutes when you interview a female for her to understand or for her to decide if she will work for your company or not. So it happens that fast. They come in. I would actually say it's like 30 seconds. If I sit down with someone, I'm pretty sure I know in a few seconds if I'm going to work with you or not, just based on what happens in those initial interactions. 2 minutes is a long time. So that is really, those conversations are really derived from conversations that, I guess what I should say is what you pick up on in those few seconds is how they think about culture of inclusion. And so what have you done, or what do you think are the most important things of the culture in general to really make it inclusive so that everyone becomes successful? And that it's not just, because, we talked a little bit this morning about the developer culture that is like, we got all these gaming stations, we've got ping pong tables, and those are just like one tiny small thing. But culture is really derived from how people talk, how they communicate, how they respect people's opinions. And we really believe that there's these, things that people have just learned that sometimes create the problems in culture that unless we address them, they don't get changed. And I think you've made special efforts at Domo, probably under Kathy's leadership, to help make sure the culture is very inclusive of everyone. What are those things that you're finding that are working?
That's a good question. I don't know if we're necessarily great at that, to be honest with you. I've tried to, because we do like the things I like doing with the special events that we go to, and I call the execs like, hey, we're going to a ball game. So I don't know if we are great at that. I wouldn't think that we are. But and I also, this is, I think, I'll give you a glimpse into my head, and this may be a little bit controversial. It may piss some of you off, but just kind of
prefaced every statement with that.
Real.
Just say it.
Have I?
Yeah. Just say it.
But it's. I think, like, I would never say or think that men or women are better at math or better at science, because there's women that are every bit as capable in everything that you do that men are as capable of, and it goes for things that women are traditionally good at or maybe more naturally good at. If you look at nature versus nurture, but when I was thinking about, I was reading your articles last night at 4 a.m, I was thinking, there's some things like, yes, there's women in combat now. Play that even 200 years. I don't know if there's going to be equal number of women in combat as there's going to be men in combat. That doesn't mean that engineering cultures aren't screwed up, and maybe they do things that make women not feel comfortable, and they need to fix those things, unquestionably. And I think, just again, what you're doing is awesome, because the awareness, I've read thousands of articles about this, and one of the articles I read that you sent to me was interesting. Just increasing maternity leave from 12 weeks to 18 weeks at Google doubled the number of, doubled the retention that they had of women after the maternity break. So clearly something happening in 12 to 18, from week 12 to week 18, that makes them feel like they can go back, and that's what they decide that they want to do. So I thought that was an interesting statistic. But yeah, I think for us, the culture, just trying to do things that are not exclusionary. I think we do that, but I honestly don't know how inclusive we really are.
So and I'm totally not following the questions I sent you, just so you know. So there's kind of two topics that I think are kind of interesting, and I'd love your thoughts on one. So one of them is, in all of the studies that have come out recently, this is kind of specifically tied to engineering, and I think Catherine and I will talk about it in a second also, but we actually lose about 38% of all women who come into engineering fields, so through computer science or engineering, actually end up leaving after about 7 years, and they never come back to engineering. They stay in the workforce, but they actually switch to other areas. That's a really interesting challenge to start thinking about. What they cite predominantly is culture-driven. And so, we're trying to figure out how we get into action. And I actually think when they cite a lot of those things around culture, it wasn't that someone intentionally did something. It's just the what so of these environments that have been created. Right. I actually don't know how to solve this one, right? Because it's a really big issue. But if we already have this many women going into tech, right? I'm one of 3 women in my computer science graduating class, right? How do we, how do we make sure that pool of people stays engaged with us as they go throughout their workforce? Because, they have the opportunity to have the same performance, the same contribution. And, this culture thing it's a big deal. And it's a really hard problem. I have not come up with a good way to say, hey, educate the world on culture of inclusion. But I think there are these small things that happen, right? I guess maybe some stats to throw at you related to that. In our economic survey for the Women Tech Council, we found a couple of things. We found that only 13% of them ever leave the workforce. The majority of them stay. And when they are looking at job opportunities and where to go, I'm going to assume everyone pays everyone the same and there's interesting job growth. They care most about flexibility, and that doesn't mean they want to work less hours. And then they care about reputation of company. And I think that flexibility one is a huge driver into culture, because what that really means for women is they want to have a results-oriented environment that also supports all the other important things in their family.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do?
Yeah, it's, sometimes environments just don't mix with people, whether it's where you're at in your life, men, women, whatever. And I think there's definitely some periods in startups where it's not conducive to someone that can't, make some sacrifices for work.
Sure. I think all women are willing to make sacrifices for work.
I didn't say that they are or they aren't. I'm just saying that, to expect that companies that have 100 people that got some big VC backing, that are just doing anything and everything they can to survive and make it, the kind of programs that you can get when you're Adobe or when you're Domo that's getting bigger. It's really important, the things that Adobe does. It's really important, the things that we can do to show that I have a long list. I have a list of probably 38 things that I want to do for my employees that I'm going to do over time. Yeah. But you kind of got to wait till you get to a certain size and a certain pace before you can do those things. And, I think it's, the culture stuff's really, I think, it's, as you were talking, I was thinking, I don't know of any lists I can look at that say, here's the 5 things that you should do. If you want to celebrate women, here's the 5 things that you should do. If you want to, but I know what I should do, just listening to you talk. I know exactly what I should. I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, okay, I know Catherine has a bunch of women that work for her in engineering, a bunch. She has a handful of women that work for her in engineering. They don't have a voice other than the one that they have through Catherine, and thankfully have a female that they're working for. But clearly they should have, any other group, any other special group you have in your organization. Just like I was talking to one of my sales executives a couple days ago. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take the top 5 sales execs. I'm going to let you guys come meet me once a quarter. I don't want to hear directly from you guys. I would think that's a best practice that you should implement. If there truly is the problem that you're talking about, then anybody that has female engineers, you should get them together, and you should make sure that the CEO and at minimum some other executives collect the information who has the ear of the CEO, but the CEO, if not he or she, him or herself, then you should make sure you're getting that information. So, but I don't know. I would love, if you guys had a list and said, here's the top 10 things everybody needs to do. Here's your ranking. Here's how many female executives we have. Here's how many females you have in your company. Here's who you rank in the state. Here's who you rank in tech. And here's the top 5 things you should do. And you only get a C+ on the top 5 things because you only do 2 of them. I promise we talk about it.
Okay, we might just do that. Because we do care a lot about this, inaction thing, because we're struggling. This culture one is one we're struggling with because the success of solving this problem is a conversation between men and women.
Yeah.
Like, women do not solve this problem on their own. Because our work lives are dictated by our male counterparts. Like, the majority of us, right? You're the only woman usually in that room, and we're totally fine with that, right? We just want to make sure that we have really interesting paths.
On that point, yeah. It's so this lady I was talking to as well. So a couple of things, like, it's I think cultures have changed. Like, I think when I started my career 20 years ago, there were a lot more strip club invites than there are today.
I'm glad we've reduced that.
It's just, and I know a lot of women that are my age or older, and they have stories of, I was one of the guys, so I just go to the strip clubs with them. Like, really? But it's exactly what we did. And, I think people are more aware that those things are exclusionary, and they're more aware that they might get sued. They're more aware that they might get in trouble. So I think the environments have changed. I've never felt or heard people say things about women behind their backs that are exclusionary or that are demeaning or that they're not like us. Like, I don't hear those things. Early on in my career, I might hear jokes that were off color, but most off color jokes that we have in our company mostly come from Heather. So, hook 'em horns. UT, right? But she makes sure that we know it's a safe environment. Actually, it might be Kathy. I don't know. But I think the environment's changed. I think people want to fix these things. And to your point, like you said, you're okay being the only woman in the room. I know you're okay being the only woman in the room, but this lady that Elisa I was talking to said something to me that was really fascinating. She said, when you only have 1 or 2 females on a board, you're 1 or 2 females on a board. When you have 3 or more females on the board, it goes away. And then we're all just board members working together. And she said the same thing was true for my whole career. And she worked at a Fortune 500 company and was CIO at one of them. And she said, if I was the only one, I was the only one. And everyone knew I was the only female in there. And I definitely knew I was the only female in there. As soon as it went to 3, it went away.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, that there's some tipping point wherein for everyone it's no longer a conversation. So going back to something you just talked about, which is related to culture, I don't think that our cultural problem is intentional. I think it is just what's happened, right? Because of the culture of society and how we grew. And in my experience has been the same, right? Like, I never walked away going like, oh, okay, I can think of like 2 examples, right, where I was like, that was not what I expected.
Sure.
But in general, right, that's not my experience. I don't think that it is an intentional culture. But let me kind of share this experience. So as I was fundraising for my company, that was probably the very first time that it was more apparent, the difference between how women and men were treated in the environment. As I was fundraising, and we were talking about it a little bit, and I had asked some of my venture friends, I said, hey, just give me... tell me what you do when you're going to recruit a CEO. Like, I really want, Josh James to take my money so I can invest it in his company. Like, what do you do, to go recruit Josh James? Okay, no one has to recruit you, but pretend that, what do you go to those male counterpoints when you want you want to be the lead on that investment? What do you do? And then they list for me all the things, and they list things like, oh yeah, they always say golfing, but that's just because that's the thing to say. But it just represents, right, this tier of things. And then when I said, and what do you do to go recruit the women CEOs that you want? And it's a really hard question to answer, because you actually didn't intentionally not do the same things, but you didn't do them. Right? Like, you really pursued those women or those men in a very different fashion, because you called them up to go to this specific activity or go hang out at this event or go to this lunch or whatever. And you actually didn't do the same thing with women. For the first time ever, like, I actually understood what those conversations meant. And it wasn't that they were trying to exclude me. Yeah. And it wasn't that they were trying to approach me differently. It just happened.
Yeah.
And I find that that's a really hard conversation to start changing, right? And my belief is that only by starting a conversation will it change. Yeah. And we have to somehow get all of those people who are making those decisions in the room just thinking about it to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have nothing for you on that. I wouldn't know what to do either. I mean, I haven't thought about that. You know, it's funny. I think it's similar to any recruit. You bring somebody in, what do you do with them? Because sometimes I watch some people that are flying somebody in and hiring them. You know, you find out they had them get a rental car, and then they came and they waited in the lobby, and they met with them, and you knew they weren't flying home until the next morning. But what did you do with them after work? It's like basic stuff, kind of like what you're talking about. And you know, I think I do those things, but I don't have a playbook for it by any means. And I think more awareness would certainly help. It's one of the things that I struggle with, that maybe whether they have diversity classes that you're forced to take in college if you want to get a business management degree, you start thinking about these things earlier on in your career, you figure them out. But like one thing that's true, and I've known this for a long time, we've talked about this, was in those articles, women don't ask for promotions the way that men do. Most of the times they don't ask for them. You know, they don't make sure they get theirs. You know, and it's so a lot of times you forget. So I always am trying to force myself to remember, you know, when, like Catherine Wong, who just got a promotion, you know, when we're talking to her, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, all right, she's not going to tell me everything she really wants. She's not going to come and be like, if you don't do this, then I'm going to bail. That's not the conversation that we're going to have. But that doesn't mean she doesn't want what she deserves, and that doesn't mean if I don't give her what she deserves, she's not going to bail. She will. So I've got to make sure I'm thinking that way. And so you do have to think differently about, and this is generalization, sure, but you do have to remember that there are these differences for whatever reason. And maybe it's because of the environment that we've all created. And like you said, maybe it's unintentional. And one thing I wanted to make clear too is I don't understand what it's like to be women. I may have said some things up here that are very offensive to you guys. I don't know, because I don't know what it's like, you know, and I try to understand. And maybe I even said some things today that made that perpetuate the problem. But, you know, we're not educated and taught about how to think about how we manage the women that do work for us, ever. And, you know, I think when you look at that and you understand that there are differences, and you understand that they do need to be told generally that they're doing a good job, a little bit more than the men that work for you, and generally you're going to need to do a touch base a little bit more frequently than you might do with a guy that I can leave, you know, I mean, my last CTO, Darren, we kind of laughed that I'd leave him for like 18 months, and then he'd be like, hey, Josh, I'm kind of feeling like, you know, maybe we should talk. I'm like, is that time again? He's like, yeah. You know, and then we have the conversation. Right. It's just a different form of communication. But I don't know what those things are. I don't think I'm good at that. I try to be aware of it. You know, I try to be sensitive to that. I do have 6 daughters, you know, and so I understand the differences because I had 4 little brothers. So I know men and women are different. But the things that we should do as a company, the ways that I should manage those executives differently, that's another area where I think we just don't know. So it's good we're talking about the problem.
Right. And so I think you said something really important there. I do believe that as women in tech, we own part of this issue too, and we can be better, right? I think that it's never a one-way street, that it's about this joint conversation. And you had the amazing opportunity to interview Cheryl last year too on that whole lean in topic. And we really do embrace that, right? That we have this responsibility ourselves to also come to the table and be part of that conversation. Okay, so you inspired me that we should do a few things. I really like your ranking idea. Although I'm always on the fence, right? Like, you're really bold and fearless about those things, and we always have these internal conversations.
Give me the data, I'll publish it.
Okay, that's a good plan. So,
and you know, one other thing I was going to say too is, I think so. I made the point earlier, and I do feel this way. Like, especially when I was going to college, when what's that thing called? It feels like discrimination against white men. Quotas. What's it called? Affirmative action. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get very much sleep because you guys made me get up early, way before my wake-up time. But it's, you know, that's how I grew up, and that's what I remember thinking. I remember thinking, like, that's not fair, that's not right. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm working my butt off. Because I don't think about the great environment my parents gave me here. I didn't think about that when I was growing up. I'm just like, this is what I was given, and I'm working hard, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. You let me in. Yep. And, you know, you get a little older, you understand things a little bit better, but it's, you know, it's funny to me. when people talk about, and they do say this, they do say, well, we need to hold on to her because she's a female and we don't have a lot of them. And I'm sure that horrifies you. It horrifies me,
Yeah, it horrifies me.
Right? But they just don't know what else to do.
Right.
But what I think is okay, and what doesn't bother me, is you recognize diversity can help you. You recognize that you've got a problem in your culture, a problem in your company, that you're not doing well there. What is okay and honest and genuine and not disrespectful? And the thing that I feel great about is extra attention, extra training, extra conversations, because that's not doing them a disservice at all. That's recognizing here's an investment that I want to make, and you manage them up, and you give them that experience, and you give them those insights. And, and I've been doing that. I've been doing that for 10 years, and I don't think it'll offend Catherine, but, I did that with Catherine. Right when I saw Catherine, she came as a staff engineer right out of BYU to come work for us. And then Brett Ayers, he's this genius freak, and he's the only person he respected in the whole company was Catherine. And I was like, okay, do everything we can to protect her, first of all. Second of all, how do we get her where she can be? How do we help her get all this potential? Just like you would do with anyone else. But then I also and she's a female, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help her. So we did get her some training and things that she asked for. She's like, okay, I feel like I need some more in this area. Awesome, let's do it. Carte blanche, let's go. And so I think that's something else that would be a best practice and has helped me over the years for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, in fairness, right? You're right. There are differences in men and women. I think it's important to understand that, and it's important to make sure we foster cultures that make them most successful, because, as a woman in technology, all we care about is performance, right? We want a culture of performance. We don't want a culture of diversity because it was the thing to do.
Right.
We want it because we do an amazing job at our jobs, right? And we can provide amazing contributions to the success of a company. That's what we want.
Right.
And I think that those are really good points for how we can kind of embrace that. So our time is up. So thank you so much for helping us kick off this conversation and for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.